The world is not fair. And the sooner you accept this brutal truth, the sooner you stop wondering why people chase those who withdraw while ignoring those who remain available. Right now, while you're watching this, someone less attractive than you, less accomplished than you, less interesting than you is creating desperate attachment in others through strategic scarcity. Not because they're better, because they understand something you've been ignoring. Human psychology is wired to panic when resources feel scarce and cling desperately to what might disappear. Every time you make yourself constantly available, you're destroying your value. Every time you respond immediately, you're training people that access to you costs nothing. Every time you provide unlimited emotional availability, you're teaching others that losing you carries no consequence. And they're responding exactly as psychology predicts. They take you for granted. They invest minimally. They keep you as backup while pursuing scarce alternatives. Here's the truth nobody wants to admit. Abundance kills desire, while scarcity creates obsession. You can be brilliant, accomplished, and genuinely valuable. But if you're always available, always responsive, always emotionally accessible, people will treat you as unlimited resource rather than scarce opportunity. Not because they're cruel, because human brains are hardwired to prioritize scarce resources over abundant ones. It's survival mechanism that you're triggering against yourself through unlimited availability. I am Niccolò Machiavelli. 500 years ago, I watched power dynamics in Renaissance Italy, where those who made themselves scarce commanded desperate loyalty, while those who remained constantly available were taken for granted and eventually discarded. Scarcity wasn't about actual value. It was about perceived availability. The prince who granted audiences rarely was pursued desperately. The courtier, always present, was ignored. In this video, I'm going to reveal 6 brutal strategies of temporal and emotional scarcity that install panic about losing you and create desperate attachment. This isn't about playing games. This is about understanding that human psychology responds to scarcity with panic and abundance with apathy. The psychology of scarcity and panic Machiavelli lived in environments where access to powerful figures determined survival. He observed that people didn't value those they could access easily. They obsessed over those whose time and attention were scarce. This wasn't rational calculation. It was psychological response to scarcity, triggering loss aversion mechanisms. Human neurology hasn't changed. Your brain prioritizes scarce resources because in ancestral environments, abundance meant low value, while scarcity meant critical importance. When someone is always available, your brain categorizes them as abundant resource, low priority, easily replaced. When someone is rarely available, your brain triggers panic about losing access to scarce resource. Most people make themselves constantly available because they think accessibility creates attraction. This is backward. Constant availability kills attraction by eliminating scarcity. Strategic withdrawal creates panic that constant presence never could. Now, I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I create scarcity. They panic about losing me. 1. Unpredictable withdrawal. After peak engagement. The first strategy is withdrawing suddenly after periods of intense engagement. You create deep connection through focused attention, then disappear unpredictably. The withdrawal triggers. They were so present, now they're gone. Did I do something wrong? I need to recapture their attention. Think about how most people behave after positive interactions. They maintain consistent availability. They follow up immediately. They think sustaining engagement requires constant presence. This predictability allows others to take them for granted because they know access is guaranteed. Here's what happens with unpredictable withdrawal. The sudden absence after peak engagement creates cognitive dissonance. They were receiving intense attention, now receiving nothing. Their brain interprets this as potential loss of valuable resource. This triggers panic and desperate attempts to restore connection. They become focused on recapturing what disappeared. When you remain constantly available after positive interactions, you train people that connection is stable and guaranteed. When you withdraw unpredictably, you create uncertainty that feels dangerous. Their brain prioritizes resolving this uncertainty, which means focusing intensely on you to understand why you withdrew and how to restore connection. Machiavelli understood that power operates through creating dependency, then threatening withdrawal. Your intense engagement creates dependency on the positive feelings you provide. Your sudden withdrawal threatens that dependency, creating panic about permanent loss. Most people fear withdrawing because they worry about losing connection. This fear keeps them perpetually available and consequently taken for granted. Dominant strategists withdraw strategically because they understand withdrawal after engagement creates panic that constant availability never generates. Here's the brutal truth. Your constant availability after positive interactions is training people that you're always there. The unpredictable withdrawal creates fear of permanent loss that makes them desperate to recapture your attention. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I withdraw unpredictably. They panic and chase. 2. Limited time windows that create urgency. The second strategy is offering access only during limited, non-negotiable time windows. You're available intensely during specific periods, then completely unavailable outside them. The limitation triggers. I must engage during this window or lose the opportunity. Missing this access feels dangerous. Think about how most people handle availability. They accommodate others' schedules. They're flexible with timing. They think being available whenever others want creates strong relationships. This flexibility makes your time feel unlimited and therefore worthless. Here's what happens with limited time windows. People must adjust their lives to access you during your available periods. This creates urgency. They can't access you whenever convenient, so missing your availability window means losing opportunity until the next opening. This scarcity of access time triggers loss aversion and makes them prioritize your windows. When you accommodate everyone's timing preferences, you signal your time has no competing demands. It's abundant resource they can access any time. When you enforce limited windows, you signal your time is scarce resource with competing priorities. This makes accessing you feel valuable rather than assumed. Machiavelli observed that those who grant access rarely are pursued more desperately than those always available. Your limited windows create artificial scarcity that makes people rearrange their lives to fit your availability rather than expecting you to fit theirs. Most people accommodate others' schedules because they fear losing connection through inflexibility. This accommodation makes their time worthless. Strategic people enforce limited windows because they understand urgency created by temporal scarcity makes others desperate to access them. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your unlimited temporal flexibility is advertising that your time has no value. The limited window creates urgency that makes people prioritize accessing you over other activities. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. My time is scarce. They adjust or lose access. 3. Emotional withholding after providing abundance. The third strategy is withholding emotional validation after periods of providing it abundantly. You create emotional dependency through validation and support, then withdraw that emotional supply strategically. The withholding triggers. I need their validation. Why did it stop? What do I need to do to get it back? Think about people who provide consistent emotional support. They're always validating, always supportive, always emotionally available. This consistency creates expectation of unlimited emotional supply. People take it for granted because they know it's always there. Here's what happens with strategic emotional withholding. After creating dependency on your validation, your withdrawal creates emotional panic. They've become accustomed to receiving emotional supply from you. When it stops, they experience withdrawal symptoms similar to addiction. They become desperate to restore the emotional supply you've cut off. When you provide unlimited emotional validation, people habituate to it. It becomes expected baseline rather than valued resource. When you provide abundantly, then withhold strategically. You create emotional scarcity that makes them panic about losing access to validation they've come to need. Machiavelli would recognize this as creating dependency, then leveraging it. Your abundant emotional supply creates need. Your withholding creates panic about losing supply. This combination makes people desperate to regain your emotional availability. Most people provide consistent emotional support because they think it builds strong bonds. It does, but bonds where you're taken for granted. Strategic people provide abundantly, then withhold because they understand creating, then threatening to remove emotional supply generates desperate attachment. Here's the brutal truth. Your unlimited emotional availability is making people dependent, but not desperate. The withholding after abundance creates panic about emotional loss that constant support never triggers. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I withhold validation, they beg for it back. 4. Visible alternative options that trigger competition panic. The fourth strategy is making your alternative options visible without explicitly threatening replacement. Others can see you have options, which triggers. They could replace me easily. I need to increase my investment or risk losing access to them. Think about people who hide their options to avoid making others jealous. They think keeping alternatives invisible protects relationships. This actually reduces their perceived value because others assume they have no alternatives. They're fully available because no one else wants them. Here's what happens with visible alternatives. When others see you have options, their brain interprets this as scarcity. You're in demand, which means access to you is competitive resource. This triggers competition panic. They must invest more or risk you choosing alternatives. The visibility creates urgency without you explicitly threatening anything. When you hide alternatives, others assume you're fully available to them by default. When alternatives are visible, they're forced to recognize they're competing for scarce access. This transforms their psychology from taking you for granted to panic about losing competitive position. Machiavelli understood that perceived replaceability creates complacency, while perceived irreplaceability creates desperation. Making your options visible signals your scarce resource being competed for, which makes people panic about losing their access. Most people hide alternatives because they fear making others insecure. This protectiveness backfires by reducing perceived value. Strategic people make alternatives subtly visible because they understand competition panic drives desperate investment. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your hidden alternatives are letting people assume you're fully theirs by default. The visible options create competitive panic that makes them fight to maintain access. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. My options are visible. They compete desperately. 5. Progressive decrease in availability. Over time, the fifth strategy is progressively reducing your availability over time rather than maintaining consistency. You start accessible, then gradually become harder to reach. The decrease triggers. They're slipping away. I'm losing access. I need to increase effort or they'll disappear completely. Think about relationships where availability remains constant. People know exactly how much access they have. This consistency allows them to take that access level for granted as permanent baseline. There's no urgency because availability isn't changing. Here's what happens with progressive decrease. Each reduction in availability triggers new panic. They notice you're less available than before, which signals they're losing you gradually. This creates urgency to reverse the trend before total loss occurs. The progressive nature makes the scarcity feel like active loss rather than stable state. When you maintain consistent availability, people habituate to whatever level you provide. When you decrease progressively, each reduction feels like loss, triggering panic about total loss if the trend continues. This makes them desperately try to restore previous access levels. Machiavelli would note that static situations create complacency, while declining situations create panic. Your progressive reduction makes people feel they're actively losing you, which triggers much stronger emotional response than stable scarcity. Most people try to maintain consistent availability because they think reliability builds relationships. This stability allows others to take them for granted. Strategic people decrease availability progressively because they understand the experience of losing creates panic that stable states never generate. Here's the brutal truth. Your consistent availability is so stable that people never fear losing you. The progressive decrease creates ongoing panic about total loss that makes them desperately try to reverse the trend. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. I decrease availability. They panic about total loss. 6. Conditional access based on their investment. The sixth strategy is making your availability conditional on their demonstrated investment rather than freely given. They receive access proportional to effort invested. The conditionality triggers. I must invest more to maintain access. Reduced investment means reduced access to them. Think about people who provide access regardless of others' investment. They're equally available whether others invest heavily or minimally. This unconditional access rewards low investment, training people that effort is unnecessary. Here's what happens with conditional access. People learn that accessing you requires demonstrated investment. Low investment yields low access. High investment yields high access. This creates motivation to invest maximally to gain maximum access. The conditionality makes your availability feel earned rather than given. When you provide access unconditionally, you remove incentive for investment. Why invest effort when access is guaranteed regardless? When access is conditional, people must continuously invest to maintain it. This transforms them from passive recipients to active pursuers. Machiavelli understood that unconditional resources are taken for granted while conditional resources are valued. Your conditional access makes people work continuously to earn and maintain availability. This ongoing effort creates psychological investment that makes losing access feel catastrophic. Most people provide access unconditionally because conditional availability feels manipulative. This generosity makes them taken for granted. Strategic people enforce conditional access because they understand making people work for availability creates desperate attachment to maintaining it. Here's the final truth. Your unconditional availability is teaching people they don't need to invest to maintain access. The conditional access creates panic about losing access if investment decreases. I want you to drop this affirmation in the comments. Access requires investment. They work desperately. Scarcity creates obsession. If you don't master strategic scarcity, you'll spend your life being taken for granted by people who chase those who withdraw. This isn't about being cruel or playing games. This is about understanding that human psychology responds to abundance with apathy and scarcity with panic. Your constant availability, immediate responses, unlimited emotional supply, hidden alternatives, consistent access patterns, and unconditional availability are training people that losing you carries no consequence. The world doesn't reward those who make themselves constantly available. It rewards those who understand that scarcity triggers loss aversion, panic that creates desperate attachment. Right now, every moment of constant availability is reducing your value. Every immediate response is teaching people that access to you is guaranteed. Every unlimited emotional supply is habituating people to taking you for granted. Start withdrawing unpredictably after engagement. Start enforcing limited time windows. Start withholding emotional validation strategically. Start making alternatives visible. Start decreasing availability progressively. Start conditioning access on demonstrated investment. These patterns install panic about losing you that constant availability never creates. Machiavelli understood that power operates through scarcity. Those who made themselves abundant were ignored. Those who made themselves scarce were pursued desperately. This applies to personal relationships as much as political power. The world will take for granted anyone who remains constantly available. But those who master strategic scarcity, who withdraw unpredictably, limit access windows, withhold emotional supply, display alternatives, decrease availability, and condition access on investment, create desperate attachment that abundance never generates. If this video revealed how your availability is destroying your value, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to understand scarcity psychology. And subscribe because we're having real conversations about power. Outthink the crowd. Create scarcity. Watch them panic. Now I want you to drop this final affirmation in the comments. I am scarce. They attach desperately. Now go weaponize scarcity. The world responds to those who withdraw strategically.